single CSV file. So first task is just to import libraries, right? So it's pretty straightforward, cut and dry. We import NumPy, pandas, and from pandas we can import data frame, but that's not required. We can do that though. And next thing we do is we have to count the total number of votes, right? So first thing I have to do is to load the file. When I loaded it, I loaded the state column. Okay, let me actually download this data set so I can like run this, make modifications to this. Because I don't think I have, maybe I have this data set. Let me see. I don't know if I have this data set. Yeah, I don't have this data set. Okay, let's go find it, download it. So give me a second to download the data set. And then I'll rerun these cells because I want to add a few lines to them to kind of visualize the data set for those of you who don't have it pulled up already. Okay, extract. Okay. Huh? Okay. Wait, what? All right. For some reason, it's not like the file like that I have is like corrupt or something. So I have to delete this, and then yo, what? Okay, cool. So now we can come back here. Okay. Okay, I got it. So let me re-screen share. Okay. So let me quickly put in the correct path. So yo, what? Initialization for file failed? Okay, I don't know why it's not letting me. Okay, whatever. I'm not gonna worry about that for now. I will just describe the data set based on how it looks from Excel. So I'll pull it up and then I'll look at it from the Excel side. Because I don't know why it's like not working right now. So let me read the file. But basically, the file has these different columns, right? It has the state, the county, the candidate, the party. So what we're doing is we're setting the state as kind of the index. So usually when you load in a CSV file, the index is just going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. It's just going to be numerical indexing, like you see in this Excel sheet, based on the number of rows. So if there are like 50 rows, that means the index will go from 1 to 50. So yeah, that's kind of how that works. Um, yeah. So going back to this, let me refresh the kernel without saving the changes. Oh, I see. Okay, unfortunate. But basically, what we did here is all we did was we looked at this total votes column, and we just took the sum of all the votes. So this is in
Wait,
the
Sanjay.
function that's really handy.
I think the reason is because the file path is not right. Because
No, but the folder I'm in is my downloads, right? So if we just have this, the file path should be download / President County Tehran, which is correct. So I don't know why it's not working.
All right, never mind then.
Yeah, because I'm in my downloads thing, by the way. But I don't know why it's not working right now, but it's fine. We can work around that. So basically, we just grab the total votes column, And we can use this sum function, which basically will, so the df total votes will return a series, right? So this will return a series, right? Because remember, a data frame is just a bunch of series put together. So series is just a single column, basically. So it returns a single series, and the sum function works on either like a list type object or like a series type object, and it basically sums all the different values in the series or the list. So this will just sum all the votes in the total votes column, which is exactly what we want to do. Okay, moving on. So now we want to look at the total votes cast in Texas and California and print both values out. So because of what we did in the first step, which is loading the state as the indexing column, we can actually use the location function, which is basically our alloc function, which is used to grab a specific set of values based on their indexing. But since we set the indexing to be the state, we can grab the total votes of California, and then from that we can grab the total number of votes that were cast in California. So it's kind of a two-step process. So we first grab all the entries that have California, and then we get all the votes, the sum of all the votes from California. So again, this right here returns a series which we can sum. And then we do the same thing for Texas. So task 1, 2, and 3 should have been really straightforward and pretty easy for everyone. And then I also added this other, I guess, cell just to show you guys, like, if you guys want to check the data type of all of these, sometimes it's good. So usually object just means like it's a string character. So when it gets loaded in by pandas, pandas treats those strings as objects. If it's an integer, then it'll be int64 most of the time. And then if it's like a boolean, it's going to be bool. So 1 is either going to be true or false. Okay, so now we're looking at making a histogram using either matplotlib or Seaborn, showing the total vote counts per state. So we can either use matplotlib or Seaborn, but since I like using Seaborn since it functions well with data frames, so whenever you're working with data that's formatted in a data frame, using Seaborn is always a lot easier. Although Seaborn limits certain types of plots, it is not as I guess good for like more complex plots. Usually matplotlib is used for the complex plots. But anyway, so first thing I grab here is I make these two lists. So the states list and the votes list, and then I make this dictionary, which is the states dictionary. And the reason why I'm doing this is basically the kind of logic or intuition I'm using here is I basically kind of want to grab all the states that we're looking through, so all the 50 states, and then grab the vote counts, the vote totals for each of those states. And then we're going to have those two lists, and then we're going to put those two lists together in a dictionary. If you remember, dictionaries are sort of like maps in Java, where you have one value kind of mapping to another or like corresponding to another. So we have each state corresponding to that state's vote count. And then once we have that, we can easily just use Seaborn and plot it using a bar plot. And it becomes really simple. But just to make sure the values aren't clumped, I use one of these inbuilt settings. So RC indicates, the RC parameter indicates you're fixing one of the figure settings. So in this case, I'm fixing the figure size to increase it so that the kind of column names aren't clumped together. But as you can see, it showed the Seaborn automatically actually gives each of the bars different colors, so you don't have to worry about that. So that's pretty nice. But of course, you can obviously change the setting in order to make it all one color if you want all the bars to be black or something. Okay, any questions about the first 4 tasks? No questions? Okay, moving on to number 5. So yeah, I guess Joe Biden did do too well in Texas because he only won 22 counties. But anyway, this is a pretty simple task. All it was really testing was if you knew how to do these kind of comparator statements without having to do multiple like statements, if that makes sense. So you're basically what's going on here is you're first grabbing all the counties. You're grabbing the entire data frame and getting the parts of it where the state is Texas. So by using the index as Texas, you're grabbing all the rows where the index is equal to Texas. And from there, the next thing you do is you basically look and see in this data frame, in this Texas data frame, how many of those rows have the candidate as Joe Biden, and have the one column as true. So basically, how many of them have Joe Biden and he won. And once you grab that, we have basically now have a set of rows, right? So this DF unique counties basically is just a set of rows, and we basically want to know the number, right? The number of those rows. So we just take the length of that kind of mini data frame to get 22 as the total number of counties that Joe Biden won. Okay, lastly, one of the last tasks is make a pie chart. So of course, this is quite similar to the bar plot. I used a similar kind of setup where I first had a list of candidates, and I did that by grabbing the candidate column and then using the unique function in order to grab only the unique names of the candidates. And the second thing I wanted to do was, like I said before, basically grab all the candidates, all the rows where the candidate equals a specific candidate you're looking at in this loop, and we grab the total number of votes that they got, and we basically sum the votes across that entire series that is formed. So let's return to series, and then we basically append the number of votes that candidate got to a vote list. And then afterwards, we create a dictionary where we map the candidates list and the votes to the vote list. And then we basically create a data frame from the dictionary using this function. And the next thing we do is we set the index of the candidate data frame to the names of the candidates, because that's required for the inbuilt plotter from Seaborn to know that we want the candidates to be the things that are featured on a legend. So that's that's kind of important to show to do that. And the next thing we do is, because I left a clarification that you should only show candidates who receive more than 0.5 the total vote. And you could have done that math by just multiplying it, or writing code to just say 0.5 times whatever df, the sum of df total votes or whatever. So you grab the total number of votes, multiply that by, sorry, it's not 0.5, it's 0.005. But yeah, so you could have done that, or you could have just done the math and put it in. And this is basically just grabbing all the rows of the data frame where that candidate got more than 790,000 votes. And then we finally just make a chart, a pie chart with that, by using Seaborn, the inbuilt plot.py. So basically, this specific thing just kind of goes off of or implements a feature found in matplotlib in order to make a pie chart. And one of the parameters is this auto PCT thing, which basically allows you to show the percentages on the bar. And if you guys are familiar with printf in Java, it works similarly, where you can format the float to 2 decimal places. So you could change this to 3 to get 3 decimal places, or 1 to get 1 decimal place. But yeah. And as you can see, only 3 candidates actually even got 0.5% of the total vote: Joe Biden, Trump, and Joe Jorgensen. So no one else did that well, apparently. Lastly, we want to pick out the top 5 most and least helpful counties for Donald Trump in winning the state. And I guess one of the clarifications that we had was the state is Texas. So I don't know. Sorry for specific if I didn't specify that. But basically, we do the same thing again. We grab the rows based on Donald Trump. So this time we reload the CSV, but this time we make the indexing column the candidate, and we now load the data frame and locate all the rows where Trump is the candidate. And then we basically now we set the index of that. So we start off by setting the index of the data frame as the candidate, but once we grab the Trump, the parts of the data frame that have Trump as a candidate, we reset the index to the state, because now we want to locate all the parts of the state where it's both Texas and Trump, where in that row, Texas and Trump are both present. So we grab that, we set the index, and then we and by the way, I guess if you guys forgot, in place equals true makes it that we don't have to say Trump equals Trump.setIndex. We can just not have that equivalency statement using the in place function for the in place parameter. And next thing we do is we using that, we store all the values based on the total votes. and we basically grab the first 5 by using head and then the last 5 by using tail. And of course, we get these specific counties, and of course, the county. So you could have done that either. Either of those ways would have worked. And then the bonus task is the same thing basically, but in this situation, you're basically not restricted to just Texas. So you do actually, it's actually the bonus task is actually slightly easier than the task 7 because this time you actually don't even have to look at the state. You can just grab all the rows that have Joe Biden and then sort the values of those rows by the total number of votes that Joe Biden got. So it seems like Joe Biden actually got 0 votes some places. That's interesting. Wait. Yeah, I don't know how that works, but apparently got 0 votes. That's weird. But anyway, does anyone have any questions about the project, or I guess the lab that we did? No questions? Anyone? No questions? Okay. I guess we will move on now. So the next topic for today, let me pull up the list of topics that I wrote down somewhere. I found it. So today, the main topic we'll be talking about is we'll be going into depth into the types of learning in machine learning. So this is going to be very theoretical, today's discussion. And we're also going to, before we do talk about that actually, we're going to quickly run through like in general, what do you do with like, for example, tabular data, like the data we've been working with in CSVs in order to train a machine learning model. So we're going to be specifically looking at tabular data and just thinking of this from like a very high level perspective. And yeah, so we'll spend about 5 minutes doing that, and then we'll jump into a quick PowerPoint talking about different types of learning, and then we'll be done for today. So first, let me actually just pull up Paint, because I think Paint's actually going to be a pretty handy thing to kind of talk about this idea. So apparently I can't share Paint. It's kind of weird. Hello? Paint, please. I guess I'll just share my entire screen. So can you guys see the Paint? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So we started off with these CSVs, right? So for example, if you take that presidential data set we had, right, it was like a CSV that had these bunch of columns and rows, right? So we had the CSV with like name. Let's say we have a new CSV actually to make it really interesting. So we have a column that's name, another one that's first name, the one column that's last name, one column that's age, and we'll have one column that's date of birth, and we'll have one column that's I don't know, like let's say how good you are at driving, right? So let's say there's a scale between 1 to 10 of how good you are at driving, okay? And basically the research question we're asking now is, if we're given this data, which of these variables, like first name, last name, age, or I guess just not make this date of birth. That's a bad variable to have. Let's say your IQ. Let's say it's your IQ, okay? Taken from an IQ test. Okay, and basically the question is, which of these variables, the first name, last name, age, or IQ, best predicts how good you are at driving, right? So this is a very simplified and very simplified version of what kind of problems you'll be facing when you're trying to think of whether machine learning is useful or not in a certain context. So the first thing is based on logic, right? Like we can basically rule out first name and last name from like having any significance on how good you are at driving, right? Because first of all, there's like an infinite number of names, like first names, and there's a seemingly infinite number of last names too. So like there's really no mathematical relationship you can derive between them, right? Just because of the sheer number of first names and last names. So we basically can just exclude first name and last name from further analysis, just because like um, it's just like uninformative. So we can just like not use this. So now we're left with age and IQ, right? So both of these could plausibly have some sort of relationship, but we probably have to investigate that. So now we can basically just create a new data frame after we load this in that only has these three columns, right? Because we're not going to consider these first two. So next, now we want to say, okay, let's try to train a machine learning model. Well, the first thing machine learning has to have is it needs to have two types. The data you have needs to be divided into two categories, right? So you have this data, and you have to divide it into a training set and a testing set. So generally, you hear of these if you guys have ever heard of like machine learning, or you guys have looked at machine learning projects in the past, you'll see people who talk about their research say we use the 70-30 split or 80-20 split. Basically, what that means is that they use 70% of the data for training and 30% for testing. And this goes across for like not just numerical and like CSV and tabular data. It also goes for like images. So 70% of the images were used for training, and 30% were used for testing. And you can also do the same thing for like natural language processing or like word processing. So a certain number of pieces of text were used for training, and some were used for testing. And within training is this idea of validation, which we'll talk about later. But now I don't want to go into that. It's a little confusing. But just know that if you hear the word validation, it's kind of this subset of training. But anyway, so now the next thing we have to do is, so now we've divided data into training and testing. Okay. So now what we have to do is we have to basically take the data from the training and basically feed that into the machine learning model. Okay. The machine learning model does some stuff, forms these relationships. And after the machine learning model is trained, so this is the ML model, after it's trained, we feed that out, and now we have a fully trained model. And now we want to test how good that fully trained model is on data it's never seen before. So then we give it the testing set, right? We give it the testing set and see how it does. And then we measure a bunch of performance metrics, like, I don't know, the accuracy of prediction, sensitivity of prediction, which basically involves false positives and true negatives and things like that. So basically, that's kind of a big picture view of how you go from a tabular data, which is stuff we worked with in the last few weeks, to a fully trained machine learning model that we can test how good it is. So yeah, that's kind of something I wanted to go over before we go through the lecture, just so you guys have a quick idea of what the biggest level, or the highest level of this pipeline looks like. Okay. We don't want to save that. Okay. So now we have this PowerPoint that I conveniently took from UPenn because I really did not want to make a PowerPoint over this topic, just because there's so many great PowerPoints out there, and it's kind of redundant for me to make my own when there's like these great PowerPoints out there. But yeah, you guys can still see my screen, right? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So we briefly, the first week, we talked about what learning, how scientists define learning, right? It's basically you have this experience, and you have this task, and you have this performance. So three things, ETP. So basically what we're saying is machines are able to do a task through learning in an experience, and you're able to test their, I guess, performance on that task. So that's kind of how learning works. And there are obviously a bunch of examples of machine learning, for example, autonomous cars, deep learning with Google, deep learning with robots, deep learning with so many things. But in essence, well, how does deep learning actually work, right? How are we able to go from these images and and pieces of text and tabular pieces of Excel files to conclusions about the relationships. How does a computer do that? Well, basically, I don't know, where can we start? We should probably just start right here. Okay. So basically, let's start off with images, because images are the easiest to conceptualize. Images, as we all know, are made up of these small pixels, right? And each of these pixels, as you can see down here, it has a slightly different color based on the intensity of that specific area of the image. So basically, what a machine learning model does is it starts off with this input image. It looks at that input image and it's like, okay, let's start off with the smallest possible level of this image, which is the pixels. So it starts off with these pixels. It kind of looks at the pixel values, and all pixel values will be between 0 and 255. And if you guys have taken APCSP, you guys know why that works. And if you guys worked with like Java and like the drawing unit in Java where we drew stuff and like shapes and stuff, you guys know that. You guys already know that. So it starts off by looking at these pixels, looking at the intensity of these pixels, and then through a bunch of these what are called layers of the machine learning model, it basically picks up on more and more salient features. So what I mean by that is it starts with pixels and it looks for edges, which are a bunch of pixels put together. Then from a bunch of edges, it looks for object parts or combinations of edges, and finally from those parts of the object, it looks for the entire object, which is like a face or like a nose or a specific thing. So basically, this is kind of like the hierarchy we see with the human body, right? So it's like cell, and then we have like the tissue, and then like the organ system, and the organism, right? So we have this kind of hierarchy, right? Well, basically, how exactly do we use this hierarchy um, um, effectively, right? Like how do we use this property in machine learning models to actually use it to make predictions and do these interesting and important things that we see in every. A series of these images or a series of data, and there are different types of learning. That's something we'll be talking about today. It's the focus of today. Different types of machine learning. Different types of learning in machine learning. So there are four main types. In this year, we'll only be looking at the first three mainly. The fourth one is a very, very mathematical and algorithmic driven one. That's pretty complex, honestly, if I'm being fair. And we can probably talk about it near the end, but we probably won't have any like dedicated days to going super deep into it. But yeah, this fourth option, reinforcement learning, is still relevant. Basically, the most common form of learning in machine learning is supervised or inductive learning. And basically, what this means is you're given this training data, and you're given the desired outputs or the labels. So thinking back to our example with this Excel file, right? We had the first name, last name, date of birth, and IQ, and we also had the fifth last column, which was how good you are at driving, right? In that case, the training data would be those first four columns. So basically everything but how good you are at driving, because those are kind of the independent variables that we're looking at. And the dependent variable would be how good you're at driving. And in machine learning, or statistics in general, this is called a label. So this is considered what's called a label. And that's basically what supervised learning is. Unsupervised learning is you're only given training data without the desired outputs or labels. And I think this is probably a little harder to visualize. So let me pull up Paint so I can kind of explain that. So the simple way to think about unsupervised learning is if you have of data, let's say you have a bunch of data points, right? And you're trying to find a relationship between them. So let's say we have weight on the x-axis, and then we have diabetes on the y-axis, right? Or type 2 diabetes is what I was supposed to call it. Type 2. Sorry for my very bad handwriting. It's kind of hard to write on a computer. But anyway, basically, we already know, like, through research and like science, that like if you're overweight, you're more likely to have type 2 diabetes. So let's say we have a weight scale that goes from, I don't know, 150 pounds or 120 pounds to 300 pounds. Okay? And we have some data points in the middle, like what is this, like 180 or something right here. And this is probably like 240 right here. And you can either have type 2 diabetes or you don't have it, right? So there's kind of only two values we can look at. So let's say 0 is here, which 0 is you don't have type 2 diabetes, and 1 is you do. Well, we're likely going to see something like this. Like we'll see like a lot of people who don't have it down here, this weight range, right? And we might see like one person like here who has it somehow. And then once you start getting to these heavier weights, we might see like more people having type 2 diabetes, right? So all these people have it, and maybe like a few people who don't, because they're lucky. Yeah, so we'll see something like this. But so with supervised learning, we would know both the weights and whether they have type 2 diabetes or not. But with unsupervised learning, we're basically not given these values on the side. All we're given is just the weight of the individual. And in that case, what we could do, we could fit this sort of regression line or sort of line kind of through the data, okay? And we can use this kind of line through the data in order to figure out whether someone has type 2 diabetes or not. And in general, what this idea is called is clustering. So basically, since in general, if you have this sort of scale of values, right? So it's not like a categorical variable, it's going to be a continuous variable. If you have this sort of continuous variable, you generally are able to put the values into these different clusters, right? And basically what the goal of unsupervised learning is to sort of find these boundaries between these clusters to best separate the points that are given, or the data that's given. So as you start adding dimensions to the training data, right? So right now we only have one piece of training data and one piece of testing, or one label. But once you start getting like 5 or 6 pieces of training data, then we technically would have data that's 5 or 6 dimensional, right? But obviously we can't like draw that out, I guess. But the machine learning model is able to understand this complex data and is able to cluster it through different sorts of algorithms that we'll talk about later. But generally, that's how unsupervised learning works. Semi-supervised learning is basically the intermediate between unsupervised and supervised. So you're given some training data and a few of the labels, but not all of them. And using those few pieces of data points, you can basically use some sort of augmentation or some sort of prediction of the model to basically get the labels of the rest of your training points that you don't have. So these three are very common. You'll see these first 3 types. We'll mainly focus on supervised and unsupervised, but we will talk a little bit about semi-supervised. And of course, the last type is kind of reinforcement learning. So yeah, looking through these again, supervised learning, you can either have regression or classification. So this is kind of like a subtype, I guess, of supervised learning. So regression in general just means that the label that you're trying to predict is not categorical, it's continuous. So it can have an infinite number of values. So for example, an example would be like the year versus the number of versus the September Arctic sea ice extent. So obviously if you're measuring the amount of sea ice somewhere, that value is going to be continuous, right? Because it could change by whatever metric, right? So it could change by square kilometers like every second, right? It could go up a little bit, go down a little bit. So it's a continuous function, and you can basically use the function to basically predict y given a value of x, which would be the year. And you can do that by like just fitting like a trend line, whether that be linear or quadratic or whatever function it might be. With classification, you basically can do the same thing. You can use a function to predict y given x, except if y is where y is the label, and the only difference here is y is obviously going to be categorical. So we have something like I showed you with the 0 and 1, versus like tumor size. And obviously, if you have a smaller tumor size, it's more likely benign or it's non-cancerous. And if you have a larger tumor size, it's more likely to be malignant or cancerous. So that's kind of this example here. And yeah, so we basically can draw like a vertical line, maybe somewhere in the middle of the data, right? We can draw like a line, like maybe here, like in the middle between this data point and this data point. We can draw a line right here and say basically anything to the left of that we can say is benign, and everything to the right of that would be malignant. And if we did that, we'd actually only have 2 incorrect, I guess, guesses or predictions, which is not that bad considering it's a very crude machine learning model, right? It literally just uses a single horizontal line to do that. And of course, this line could be placed in other ways, right? We could kind of make the line go like that or something like that. Have a line that goes between tumor size from 0 to 1, like across this. And that may predict that would technically have the same accuracy, but it would increase the specificity of the model. So there are different kind of ways that the machine learning model can be trained. And of course, X or the training data can be multidimensional. So in these 2 examples that we see here, the training data was all unidimensional, so only a single variable. But of course, it can be multidimensional. So you have like age and tumor size, and you can have a lot of other variables like clump thickness, uniformity of cell size, uniformity of cell shape, and you basically can use more and more complex lines or I guess boundary separators in order to effectively predict whether someone has a benign or malignant tumor. So unsupervised learning, like I was talking about with clustering, you're not given labels, you're just given the training data. And you basically are kind of forced to cluster the training data based on the properties of the data in order to identify the hidden structure behind the training data. So clustering is the best example. And basically what this is you have these data points, right? And you're not given any classes, right? So you're just given a bunch of data points, no classes. And your goal is to sort of figure out the kind of relationship between these data points. So clearly, if we look at it, right, like we can clearly just make 3 different circles here, right? One here, and one here. And we'd have 3 classes or 3 output labels, where maybe 0 corresponds to blue, 1 corresponds to green, and 2 corresponds to orange. So in the testing set, if any data points fall into any of these 3 clusters, it would just predict 0, 1, or 2 based on which cluster it fell in. So that's kind of how it works. And with genomics, unsupervised learning is very, very important and it's interesting. So if you guys know anything about genomics, you know that individuals and even species between species, you can kind of group them or classify them based on genetic similarity. So that's of course going to be kind of a clustering algorithm, because if we already knew the relationship between the species, there'd be no need to sort of group individuals, right? Because you'd already know what the correct biological answer is. But if we don't, we can use this unsupervised approach where we don't know the true clustering, and we kind of group people based on genetic similarity to kind of find these novel insights in how different parts of our genome kind of work together. So unsupervised learning, there's also a lot of other things you can do with it. So you can use it for astronomical data analysis, for creating stars, for social network analysis, so how people are connected, for market segmentation to identify like what areas of the market are best to sell a product, and things like that. So there's a lot of uses for unsupervised learning. And I want to skip this for now. Don't worry about that. Let's quickly look at reinforcement learning now. So reinforcement learning is the most simple, I guess, to kind of conceptualize, because it's how we learn, right? As a human. So when we're born, right, like we don't know and understand like the rules of society, right? Like when we're born, we don't know that like stealing is bad and stuff like that, right? Like we don't know that. But as we grow up, we learn all these different things about how society works, that you're supposed to try to study in school and do well and things like that. So you learn that through reinforcement, right? Because if, for example, you play games, right? And your parents, when your parents tell you not to play games on the computer or something, then you get in trouble with them when they like come to your room, right? So you learn that like playing games when your parents tell you not to is like a bad thing, right? So there's kind of this feedback loop where if you do an action, it's either perceived as good or bad, and you're either rewarded or punished for it. So there's a mapping of from states or what you do to the actions that result from those the actions that result from your actions or the reactions. So yeah, for example, like a credit assignment problem, or like game playing, or like a robot in a maze are all examples of reinforcement learning, right? Because, for example, if you're trying to figure out whether to for example, if you're looking at like playing a game, for example, right? And you're trying to figure out what the optimal move is, for example, right? You can look at all the possible moves and use like a machine learning model that gets trained on understanding the kind of benefits and downsides to each move, and using that kind of conceptualization, it can figure out which move is the optimal move, things like that. So here, this is a very complex mathematical, I guess, description of what I just talked about. So I'm just gonna skip it. But of course, what Mario game is this? I don't really know. But of course, there's a one example of like video games is definitely an example of reinforcement learning, right? Because as you collect, your goal is to collect the coins and avoid these people or things, I don't really know what they're called, from killing you. So this, of course, each object or piece in the game, it either has a benefit or a downside. So now we'll quickly discuss how to frame a learning problem. And basically what I mean by that is how you decide whether to use an unsupervised approach, a supervised approach, and or like reinforcement learning or a semi-supervised learning approach. Well, obviously the simplest example or the simplest reason why you would pick, for example, a certain type of learning is because the data is structured like that, right? If you don't have training labels and it's too hard for you to get the labels, then completely supervised learning is kind of out of the question, right? And from there, you can kind of figure out that, oh, maybe semi-supervised works and I can find the data or somehow extract data from other sources to get a small training set, which I then could use with semi-supervised learning to predict the rest of the training set. So it's kind of all up to you as the machine learning practitioner to figure out what learning method is optimal for the task that you're trying to solve. And in general, one thing that's very, very important, training and test examples are always independently drawn from the same distribution of data. What that means is that the data that you have when you first get it is always going to be from the same place or collected in the same format or done under the same protocol. And once you have that data that's collected, that's all kind of uniform or distributed in a certain fashion, you then split that data into a training and testing set, which would then stay independent. So the model would only ever see the training set and train on that. And lastly, when you finish training, then it would test on that independent testing set. Another thing is there's this idea of transfer learning that I also want to bring up. So if examples that you have, for example, like the different rows, for example, in that CSV we looked at, are not independent from each other, then we have to do something called collective classification. And essentially, what this is if you have some sort of relationship between the rows in data, which usually is not the case, right? Because if you have like different counties, for example, in the presidential race, there's not really going to be a relationship between the voting patterns between the counties, other than, for example, the state they're in or something like that. But the method of collection or the actual data itself is technically not related. So if those rows somehow are related, then you have to use something called collective classification, where you treat both those rows or both those, I guess, examples together when classifying. And the test distribution is different than the training distribution for some reason. Maybe it's because it's an already split training and testing set. You may have to use something called transfer learning, which is basically taking a pre-built machine learning model that does very well on a certain certain type of problem and applying it to your problem. So let me give you an example for this. So Google hosts a lot of competitions to see who can develop great machine learning models, and one of the models that's been developed for image classification between 1,000 different images. So these images range from like cats to dogs to like signs to computers. So these are all like very, very diverse images. So Google has this competition, and many pre-built machine learning models for computer vision or image classification have been developed. And for example, some of the names of these include ImageNet and Inception and all these different models that have been pre-built. And for example, if you're doing a computer vision task, for example, maybe you are trying to predict whether there's a computer found in a certain image, and you have 1,000 images of computers and non-computers, or images of computers and images that don't have computers, and your goal is to classify which one do and do not. It might be wise to just start off with a transfer learning approach where you take ImageNet or these other models that have already been developed and kind of add to them. So yeah, that's basically it. And I'm not going to talk about anything else in the presentation just because it's a little complex. But in general, machine learning, I guess the last slides, machine learning has advanced really quickly in the last few years. So machine learning has been around since about the 80s and 70s actually, technically, but it really has taken off in the last 10 years, and it's continuing to grow exponentially, which is why it's a really, really popular field. And something it might be important for you guys in the future. So that's all I have for you guys today. Does anyone have any final questions or any questions about anything I presented today?